The crystal chandeliers overhead cost more than what Maya earned in a year. She knew this because she'd overheard two guests discussing it earlier that evening, their voices casual as they sipped champagne that probably cost more than her weekly grocery bill. Maya moved through the grand ballroom with practiced efficiency, balancing a tray of empty glasses as she weaved between clusters of elegantly dressed people. Her black uniform was pressed and neat, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her sensible shoes squeaking softly against the polished marble floor. This was her third event at the Ashford estate this month, and she'd learned to make herself nearly invisible. That's what people like these wanted from people like her, service without presence, help without humanity. The charity gala was in full swing. Women draped in designer gowns laughed behind manicured hands while men in custom-tailored suits discussed stock portfolios and vacation homes. Maya had worked enough of these events to recognize the pattern. They'd eat expensive food, drink expensive wine, write checks that made them feel good about themselves, and then forget about whatever cause they were supporting by the time their drivers took them home. But Maya couldn't judge them too harshly. At least they were here, pretending to care. And their pretending paid her bills. She deposited her tray in the kitchen and grabbed a fresh cloth to wipe down the tables near the windows. That's when she really saw it for the first time that evening. In the corner of the ballroom, slightly apart from the main gathering area, sat the most beautiful piano Maya had ever seen. It was a grand piano, its black surface so polished it reflected the chandelier light like still water. Even from a distance, Maya could see the craftsmanship, the elegant curves of its body, the way it seemed to command attention despite being pushed to the side of the room. A small placard beside it read, "Steinway & Sons, 1923, Maya's heart squeezed in her chest. She hadn't been this close to a real piano in 12 years. 12 years since she'd left the Riverside School of Music, 3 semesters shy of completing her degree. 12 years since her mother's diagnosis had turned their world upside down. 12 years since she'd boxed up her sheet music, sold her modest keyboard, and taken a job waiting tables to help pay for medical bills that seemed to multiply faster than they could count. Her mother had beaten the cancer. Thank God, but by then the damage was done. Maya's scholarship had been given to someone else. Her spot in the performance program had been filled. Her teacher, the patient Mrs. Chun who'd recognized something special in a shy teenager from the wrong side of town, had retired and moved away. Life had moved on without asking Maya's permission. She'd promised herself she would go back to music someday. When the bills were paid, when she'd saved enough, when the timing was right. But somehow there were always more bills, never enough savings, and the timing never felt right. Days turned into months, months into years, and now she was 28 years old, serving drinks to people who would never look her in the eye. While her dreams gathered dust in a corner of her heart, she tried not to visit too often. But tonight, that piano was calling to her. Maya glanced around the ballroom. Most of the guests were clustered near the bar or gathered around the silent auction tables. Her supervisor was in the kitchen, barking orders at the catering staff. No one was paying attention to one tired waitress near the windows. She drifted closer to the piano, her cleaning cloth forgotten in her hand. Up close, it was even more stunning. The wood gleamed, not a single fingerprint marring its surface. The keys were perfect real ivory, she suspected, from an era when such things were still used. She wondered when it had last been played, really played by someone who understood its potential. Maya's fingers tingled. She could almost feel the cool smoothness of the keys beneath her fingertips, could almost hear the rich, full sound that an instrument like this would produce. Her right hand drifted up from her side, hovering in the air as if pulled by an invisible string. She knew every inch of those keys without touching them. Knew where middle C sat, where the patterns repeated, where her hands would fall naturally into the shapes of chords she'd practiced 10,000 times in another life. Muscle memory was a strange thing. Her hands remembered what her conscious mind had tried to forget. Just one key, she thought. Just to hear the sound. Just to remember what it felt like. Her fingertip was an inch from middle C when reality crashed back in. What was she thinking? This wasn't her piano. This wasn't her world. She was the help, and the help didn't touch the expensive things. The help especially didn't touch priceless antique pianos that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime of serving drinks and clearing plates, but her hand wouldn't listen to reason. It drifted closer, drawn by a force stronger than common sense. The tip of her finger brushed against the cool ivory of middle C, so lightly it didn't even make a sound, and in that moment Maya felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been locked away for 12 years, cracked open just a little bit. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who'd believed she was going to be somebody. The one who'd stayed up late practicing until her fingers cramped, who'd performed at student recitals with her heart pounding and her soul on fire, who dreamed in melodies and harmonies and the thunder of applause. Where had that girl gone? Maya's eyes stung with unexpected tears. She was so tired of being invisible, so tired of swallowing her dreams to make room for reality, so tired of pretending that this was enough, that she was fine, that she didn't wake up. Sometimes in the middle of the night with her fingers moving through piano pieces on her bedsheets, because her body missed making music so badly it practiced even in sleep. The noise of the party seemed to fade away. For just a moment it was only Maya and the piano, two forgotten things in a corner, both waiting for someone to remember what they were capable of. Her finger pressed down. Just a little harder, the note sang out, pure and clear and heartbreakingly beautiful. Middle C, the center of everything, the note that anchored all the others. It lasted only a second before Maya jerked her hand back, her face flushing hot with panic. But that single note had been heard, and everything was about to change. The voice cut through the air like a knife through silk. "Excuse me. What exactly do you think you're doing?" Maya's hand snapped back from the piano as if the keys had suddenly turned scorching hot. Her heart jumped into her throat as she spun around to face the woman striding toward her with the confidence of someone who owned not just the room, but probably the entire building. Victoria Ashford Chun was exactly the kind of woman Maya had learned to recognize at these events. Mid-50s, impossibly elegant in a navy gown that probably cost more than Maya's car. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, and her face wore an expression of disgust that made Maya's stomach drop to her feet. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Ashford Chun," Maya stammered, clutching her cleaning cloth like a lifeline. "I wasn't going to, I didn't what? Didn't just put your greasy fingers all over a priceless family heirloom?" Victoria's voice rose just enough to carry across the nearby section of the ballroom. Heads began to turn. Conversations quieted. Maya felt the weight of dozens of eyes landing on her like physical things. This was her worst nightmare. Being noticed. Being called out. Being made into a spectacle in front of all these people who already looked through her like she was made of glass. "I barely touched it," Maya said, her voice small. "I'm sorry. It won't happen again." Victoria stopped a few feet away, close enough that Maya could smell her expensive perfume. "Do you have any idea what that piano is worth?" "It belonged to my great-grandmother, Helena Ashford. She performed at Carnegie Hall. That instrument has been in my family for over a century." "I know, I saw the plaque. I'm really very sorry." Maya took a step back, ready to escape to the kitchen, to disappear, to pretend this moment had never happened, but Victoria wasn't done. She turned slightly to address the growing audience of guests who had drifted closer, drawn by the commotion like moths to a flame. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth, and Maya recognized it immediately. She'd seen that smile before, on the faces of people who enjoyed having power over others. "Can you believe this?" Victoria said to her guests, shaking her head with theatrical dismay. "The catering staff thinks they can just help themselves to whatever catches their eye." "What's next? Should we let them try on our jewelry? Take the paintings off the walls for a closer look?" Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Maya's face burned so hot she thought her skin might actually catch fire. She wanted to sink through the marble floor and disappear forever. An older man with silver hair and a expensive suit chuckled from his position near the bar. My dear Victoria, you can't blame the girl for being curious. She probably thought it was some kind of decoration. These people don't exactly grow up around Steinways. More laughter. Maya recognized the man Henry Blackwell, a famous orchestra conductor whose picture she'd seen in the arts section of the newspaper. A man whose performances she used to dream of attending back when she still let herself dream. I'm sure she meant no harm, a woman in a red dress added, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She probably can't even tell the difference between a real piano and one of those electric keyboards they sell at discount stores. The group around them had grown larger. Maya saw phones coming out. Someone was definitely recording this. Her humiliation was about to be preserved forever, ready to be shared and laughed at by people she'd never even meet. I know what it is, Maya said quietly. But her voice was swallowed by the chatter of the crowd. Victoria was enjoying herself now. Maya could see it in the way she held court, the way she played to her audience. This wasn't just about protecting a valuable piano. This was entertainment. This was a story Victoria would tell at her next dinner party, about the presumptuous waitress who dared to touch things she had no right to touch. I should probably have you fired, Victoria said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But I'm in a charitable mood tonight. That's why we're all here, isn't it? Charity? She gestured broadly at the room, and several guests murmured agreement. Maya's supervisor appeared at the edge of the crowd, his face pale with worry. Mrs. Ashford-Chung, I am so deeply sorry. Maya, get back to the kitchen right now. We'll discuss this later. Maya nodded, ready to flee, to let this moment end. She'd lose this job, probably. Her supervisor would have no choice. But at least she could leave with whatever scraps of dignity she had left. Wait! Victoria's voice stopped Maya in her tracks. She turned slowly, dread pooling in her stomach like cold water. Victoria's smile had grown wider. She looked like a cat that had just spotted a particularly interesting mouse. Actually, you know what? I've changed my mind. This is a charity event, after all. A night for giving people opportunities they wouldn't normally have. Maya didn't like where this was going. Not one bit. You were so eager to touch the piano, Victoria continued, her voice smooth as honey and twice as sweet. You looked absolutely enchanted by it. So here's what we're going to do. Since you're so fascinated by my great-grandmother's Steinway, why don't you play something for us? The crowd murmured with surprise and anticipation. Someone actually clapped. Maya's supervisor looked like he might faint. Play us a song, Victoria said, gesturing grandly at the piano. Entertain our guests. Show us what you've got. Maya's mouth went dry. She understood perfectly what was happening here. This wasn't generosity. This was the final act of humiliation. Victoria expected her to either refuse and slink away in shame, or to sit down and embarrass herself trying to plink out "Mary Had a Little Lamb," while everyone laughed. This was how rich people entertained themselves. By making people like Maya into their jokes? I really should get back to work, Maya said, hating how her voice shook. Oh, come now, Victoria pressed. Don't be modest. You were so confident a moment ago, touching things that don't belong to you. Surely you know how to play? Or were you just pretending? Just putting on airs? Henry Blackwell leaned back against the bar, his expression amused. This ought to be entertaining. Go ahead, young lady. Don't keep us waiting. Someone in the crowd called out, Play us something. Another person laughed and said, Yeah, let's hear what you've got. Maya stood frozen, trapped between the crowd at her back and the piano in front of her. Her hands were shaking. Her mind was racing. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out of there, to not give these people the satisfaction of watching her fail. But then something else rose up inside her. Something that had been buried for 12 years under bills and responsibilities and the weight of giving up on herself. It was anger, yes, but it was something more than that too. It was the memory of who she used to be, who she might have been, who she still was. Underneath the uniform and the exhaustion and the years of making herself small, Maya thought about her mother, who had worked herself to the bone even while fighting cancer, who had never complained, who had always told Maya that she had a gift. She thought about Mrs. Chun, her old teacher, who had pulled her aside after her first recital and told her with tears in her eyes that she was going to be special, that she was going to do something extraordinary. She thought about every time someone had made her feel less than. Every time someone had looked through her instead of at her. Every time she had swallowed her dreams to make room for someone else's comfort. These people wanted a show. They wanted to laugh at the poor waitress who didn't know her place. Fine. Maya lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and looked Victoria Ashford Chun directly in the eye. "All right," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'll play." The crowd erupted in surprised chatter. Victoria's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before returning, wider than before. Maya's supervisor made a choking sound. Maya walked to the piano. Her legs somehow steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her position, and placed her hands above the keys. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Behind her, she could hear the whispers, the barely suppressed giggles. The phones being positioned to capture what everyone assumed would be her humiliation, but Maya wasn't thinking about them anymore. She was thinking about music, about the language she used to speak fluently before life had forced her to forget. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and for the first time in 12 years, Maya felt like herself again. She took a breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. Maya's fingers touched the keys, and for a moment nothing else existed, not the crowd behind her, not Victoria's smug smile, not the phones recording her, not even the fear that had been choking her just seconds ago. There was only the piano, the music waiting inside it, and the 12 years of silence she was about to break. She started with Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major, it was the first piece Mrs. Chun had taught her. When she'd finally been ready for something beautiful, something that required not just technical skill, but soul. Maya remembered sitting in the practice room at Riverside, 17 years old, crying the first time she'd played it all the way through because she'd never known music could feel like that. Like coming home. Like being understood without words, but Maya didn't play it the way it was written in the sheet music. She couldn't. Too much had happened since she was 17. Too much life had worn grooves into her heart that changed the way. The music flowed out, the opening notes came out soft and haunting, each one hanging in the air like a question that had no answer. Her left hand laid down the foundation while her right hand sang the melody, but there was something raw in it now. Something that spoke of dreams deferred and midnight shifts and sitting beside hospital beds. Wondering if tomorrow would come? The laughter died immediately. Maya heard it happen, the abrupt silence that fell over the ballroom like someone had thrown a switch. But she didn't open her eyes. She didn't need to see them. She just needed to play. Her fingers moved across the keys with a certainty that shocked her. 12 years, and her hands still knew exactly where to go. The muscle memory was buried so deep that it lived in a place words couldn't touch. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The nocturne built and swelled, and Maya let everything pour into it. Every double shift worked when she was too exhausted to stand. Every time she'd passed a music store and forced herself to look away. Every moment she'd heard a song on the radio and had to blink back tears because it reminded her of what she'd lost. All of it went into the music, transformed into something that hurt and healed at the same time. She could feel the piano responding to her touch. This wasn't like the cheap keyboard she'd practiced on as a teenager, where you had to pound the keys to get any volume. This Steinway was alive. It understood the difference between a note played with anger and one played with sorrow. It knew the space between what she pressed and how she pressed it, and it rewarded her honesty with a richness of sound that made her chest ache. Behind her, someone made a small sound. It might have been a gasp. Maya didn't stop to find out. She transitioned without pause, letting Chopin fade into something else. Something harder. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. The piece that had almost defeated her in music school. The one she'd practiced until her fingers cramped and her teacher had to physically stop her from continuing. The piece that Mrs. Chun had said would require her to grow into it because it demanded more than talent. It demanded that you'd lived enough to understand what you were saying, Maya. understood it now. The opening chords crashed through the ballroom like thunder. Her hands flew across the keys, striking them with controlled fury, each note precise despite the speed. This piece was about power and darkness and the kind of pain that didn't ask for permission before it moved into your life and rearranged everything. The technical difficulty was insane. There were pianists with decades of training who struggled with this piece. The way the melody jumped between hands, the complex rhythms, the stretches that required fingers to span intervals that seemed impossible. It was a piece designed to humble you, but Maya's hands were everywhere they needed to be. Her fingers stretched and flew and danced, and the music that poured out was almost violent in its intensity. She wasn't playing for the crowd anymore. She wasn't even playing for herself. She was playing for every version of herself she'd had to bury. For the girl who'd cried when she sold her keyboard. For the student who'd withdrawn from school with a 4.0 average and a future everyone said was guaranteed. For the woman who'd learned to make herself invisible because being visible hurt too much. The tempo increased. Maya's whole body moved with the music now, swaying and leaning into the phrases. Her fingers attacking the keys with a precision that shouldn't have been possible after 12 years away from the instrument. But the music had never left her. It had just been waiting, stored in her bones and blood, ready for the moment she finally let it out. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. Her hands couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. The piece built toward its climax, the chords growing denser, the volume increasing until the sound filled every corner of the ballroom, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the marble floors, demanding attention, refusing to be ignored. This was what she was. This was who she'd always been, underneath the uniform and the exhaustion and the smile she painted on for customers who never looked her in the eye. She was this music, this power, this refusal to be small. The final section came. The part where the melody returns transformed, where everything that's been building finally resolves. Maya's hands moved with absolute certainty, her fingers finding notes that her conscious mind had forgotten but her body remembered perfectly. The sound that came from the piano was enormous, filling the space with emotion so raw that several people in the crowd had stopped breathing, and then, with 3 final crashing chords that seemed to shake the floor beneath her feet, it was over. Maya's hands hovered above the keys, trembling now that the music had stopped. The last note hung in the air, fading slowly, reluctantly, like it didn't want to let go. The silence that followed was absolute. Maya sat frozen, her chest heaving, tears still wet on her cheeks. She'd forgotten what this felt like. The emptiness after the music stopped. The way your whole body vibrated with the echoes of what you'd just created. The feeling that you'd just pulled something out of yourself that couldn't be put back. She was terrified to turn around. Terrified to see their faces, to return to reality, to remember that she was just a waitress who'd gotten above her station. For these few minutes, she'd been someone else, something else. She didn't want to let go of that feeling yet, but slowly, inevitably, Maya became aware of the world again. The crowd behind her. The ballroom. The fact that she was still sitting at a piano that didn't belong to her. Wearing a uniform that marked her as someone who served rather than someone who was served, she took a shaky breath and made herself turn around. What she saw made no sense at first. Her brain couldn't process it. Henry Blackwell had risen from his position at the bar. The famous conductor who'd laughed at her moments ago was standing now, his face completely drained of color, his mouth hanging open in shock. His hand gripped the edge of the bar like he needed it to stay upright. The woman in the red dress had tears running down her carefully made-up face. She wasn't even trying to hide them. A man Maya didn't recognize was staring at her like he'd just witnessed something supernatural. His champagne glass tilted in his hand, forgotten, the liquid threatening to spill. Victoria Ashford-Chun stood exactly where she'd been before, but her expression had changed entirely. The smugness was gone. The cruel amusement had vanished. She looked like someone who just watched the ground open up beneath her feet. And every single person in that crowd was staring at Maya with expressions she couldn't begin to interpret. The silence stretched on. 1 second, 2, 5, 10. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. Had she done something wrong? Damaged the piano somehow? Played so badly that she'd shocked them into silence? Then Henry Blackwell started moving toward her, his legs unsteady, like he'd forgotten how to walk properly. He pushed through the crowd, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. When he reached the piano, his voice came out rough and broken, barely more than a whisper. "Who are you?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a plea, like he needed to know the answer more than he needed to breathe. Maya opened her mouth. But before she could speak, the ballroom erupted. The applause started like a crack of lightning and turned into thunder. It wasn't polite charity gala applause. It wasn't the kind of clapping people do because they're supposed to. This was raw, explosive, the kind of sound that comes from people who've just witnessed something that changed them. Hands struck together so hard it had to hurt. People were on their feet before they realized they were standing. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" And then others joined in, the word echoing off the high ceilings. Maya sat at the piano bench, completely frozen, unable to process what was happening. Her hands were still shaking. Her face was still wet with tears. And the entire ballroom was erupting around her like she'd just performed at Carnegie Hall instead of being a waitress they'd been mocking 3 minutes ago. Henry Blackwell reached the piano first. And up close, Maya could see his hands were trembling. The famous conductor who'd performed with symphony orchestras around the world looked like he'd just seen a ghost. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice hoarse. "Where did you train? How is this possible?" Maya's voice came out small and shaky. "I'm nobody. I'm just Maya. I work for the catering company." "Nobody?" Henry's laugh was almost hysterical. "Nobody? Young lady, I've spent 40 years in the music world. I've conducted performances in Vienna, Milan, New York. I've worked with some of the finest pianists alive." He paused, his eyes bright with something that looked almost like anger. "What you just did, that wasn't just good. That was extraordinary. That was the kind of playing that comes along once in a generation." Other guests crowded closer, all wanting to speak at once. The woman in the red dress pushed through, not bothering to wipe the mascara running down her cheeks. "I'm Diana Foster," she said breathlessly. "I write for the Classical Music Review. I've been covering performances for 20 years, and I've never—" She stopped, shook her head. "I need to interview you. That interpretation of the Rachmaninoff, the emotion you brought to it, people need to hear about this." A tall man in an expensive suit pressed his business card into Maya's hand before she could react. "Robert Chun Foundation for the Arts. We fund music scholarships. Full ride, any school you want. We need to talk." Wait. Another voice, another person. Maya's head was spinning. There were too many faces, too many voices, all talking at once. Her supervisor had disappeared entirely. She wasn't even sure where he'd gone. Henry held up his hand, and somehow, miraculously, the crowd quieted. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "Maya, you said you're nobody, but that's not true." "Can't be true. You don't play like that without serious training." "Where did you study?" Maya swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight. "Riverside School of Music. I was there for 2 years before." She stopped. She didn't owe these people her story, her pain, the reasons why her dreams had died, but Henry's expression softened with understanding. "Before something happened that made you leave." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. "Who taught you?" "Grace Chun?" Maya's voice broke on the name. She was the chair of the piano program. Henry's eyes widened. "Grace Chun? Grace Chun took you as a student? You know her?" "Know her?" Henry looked around at the crowd. Grace Chun was one of the most talented pianists of her generation. She could have had a major performing career, but she chose teaching instead. She was incredibly selective about her students. Legendary for it, actually. She said most people could learn to play the notes, but very few could learn to make music speak. He looked back at Maya, his gaze intense. "She saw something in you." Maya felt fresh tears threatening. "She told me I had potential, that if I worked hard enough I could be special. But then my mom got sick, and the medical bills—" She stopped again, shaking her head. It doesn't matter now. That was 12 years ago. 12 years? Diana, the music critic, looked shocked. You haven't played in 12 years and you just performed a Rachmaninoff prelude like that? That's impossible. I practiced when I was younger, Maya said quietly. A lot, maybe too much. Mrs. Chun used to have to make me stop. She said I'd wear my hands out. Well, they certainly haven't forgotten, Henry said. He was looking at her the way Mrs. Chun used to look at her, like he was seeing something precious and rare. Maya, I conduct at Carnegie Hall. I work with the Metropolitan Orchestra. What you just demonstrated, that level of technical mastery combined with that emotional depth, it's not something you can teach. Either you have it or you don't. He paused. You have it. Maya wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But she'd learned not to hope too hard. Hope was expensive, and she couldn't afford the cost when it got taken away. I'm 28 years old, she said. I haven't performed in over a decade. I serve drinks for a living. I'm not that person anymore. The person who gets to play in concert halls. Why not? The question came from Robert Chun, the foundation director. Who says you're not that person? Reality says. Life says. I have rent to pay and bills that don't stop coming. I can't just... Maya gestured helplessly. I can't just be a musician. That's not how the world works for people like me. People like you? Henry's voice had an edge now. You mean people with extraordinary talent who've been told they don't matter because they weren't born with money? Maya flinched. He'd hit too close to home. Henry moved closer, his voice dropping so only Maya could hear. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with 5 siblings. My father was a janitor. My mother cleaned houses. When I told them I wanted to conduct orchestras, they thought I'd lost my mind. He smiled sadly. But a teacher believed in me. One teacher who saw something and refused to let it die. That teacher changed my entire life. Maya's vision blurred with tears again. Mrs. Chun believed in me. And I let her down. No. Henry's voice was firm. You survived. You took care of your mother. You did what you had to do. But Maya, he waited until she looked at him. You're still here. Your gift is still here. What you just proved to this entire room is that 12 years away couldn't kill it? Nothing could kill it because it's who you are. It's in your bones. Diana stepped forward, her phone out. Maya, I'm publishing a piece about this tomorrow. About you. About what just happened here. People need to know your story. I don't want to be a story, Maya protested. I just want... She stopped. What did she want? 5 minutes ago, she'd wanted to disappear. To hide. To forget this night ever happened, but something had shifted when she'd sat down at that piano. Something had broken open inside her chest, and she wasn't sure she could close it again even if she wanted to. Robert Chun spoke up. The offer stands, Maya, full scholarship. Finish your degree. We can make it work around your schedule if you need to keep working. And when you're ready, Henry added, I want you to audition for the Metropolitan Orchestra's Emerging Artists program. We bring in talented musicians and give them opportunities to perform with us. Paid opportunities. Maya's head was spinning. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. An hour ago, she'd been invisible. Now these people were looking at her like she mattered, like she was worth investing in. She glanced past Henry and saw Victoria Ashford Chun standing apart from the crowd. The woman who'd humiliated her, who'd turned her into entertainment, who'd expected her to fail spectacularly. Victoria's face was hard to read now. The smugness was long gone, replaced by something that might have been shame, or might have been shock, or might have been the uncomfortable realization that she'd been very, very wrong. Their eyes met across the space. Mayao didn't look away. She was tired of looking away, tired of making herself smaller so other people could feel bigger. After a long moment, Victoria broke eye contact first. Maya turned back to Henry Blackwell and the others who surrounded her with their business cards and their offers and their sudden belief that she was worth their time. I need to think, she said quietly. This is all, it's too much. Too fast. Of course, Henry said. But Maya? Don't think for too long. The world needs to hear you play. And more importantly, his voice gentled. You need to play. I saw your face when you were at that piano. That's what you look like when you're being who you really are. Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. People were still trying to talk to her, still pressing cards into her hands, still asking questions. But through it all, she kept thinking about what Henry had said, who you really are, for 12 years. She'd been Maya the waitress, Maya the caregiver, Maya the responsible one who gave up her dreams so other people could survive. She'd been so many things to so many people that she'd almost forgotten she used to be Maya the musician. Maya whose hands spoke languages her voice couldn't. Maya who made pianos sing, that person was still here, still alive despite everything. And now a room full of people knew it too. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Maya stood in the center of the crowd, clutching a handful of business cards she didn't remember collecting. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her heart was still racing. People continued to press close, asking questions, making offers, treating her like she was someone important. Someone who mattered. It felt surreal. Wrong somehow. Like she'd stepped into someone else's life by accident. I should get back to work, Maya heard herself say. The words came out automatically, a reflex born from years of putting herself last. Henry Blackwell frowned. Work? After what you just did, you're thinking about clearing tables? That's what I'm here for, Maya said. That's my job, Maya. Henry's voice was gentle but firm. Your job is to make music. Everything else is just what you do to survive until you can get back to your real job. The crowd had started to thin slightly as some guests drifted back toward the bar or the auction tables, though many still lingered, watching her like she might do something magical again. Maya caught sight of her supervisor hovering near the kitchen entrance, looking completely lost. He caught her eye and made a small gesture. Come here. Excuse me, Maya said to Henry. I really do need to talk to my boss. She moved through the remaining crowd, feeling their eyes follow her. When she reached her supervisor, his expression was a complicated mix of emotions she couldn't quite read. Maya, he said quietly. I don't even know what to say. I had no idea you could. He stopped, shook his head. Mrs. Ashford Chun wants to speak with you, privately. Maya's stomach dropped. Right, Victoria, the woman who'd humiliated her, who'd set this whole thing in motion expecting Maya to fail. Maya had been so caught up in everything else that she'd almost forgotten about the person who'd made her sit down at that piano in the first place. Where is she? The study. Down the hall, second door on the left. Maya walked through the ballroom, past the piano that had changed everything, past the remaining guests who whispered as she passed. The hallway beyond was quieter, dimmer, lined with oil paintings of people who'd been dead for generations. People who'd never had to choose between their dreams and survival. She found the study door slightly ajar. Maya knocked softly and Victoria's voice called out, Come in. The room was smaller than the ballroom, more intimate. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather chairs, a massive desk. Victoria stood by the window, her back to the door, looking out at the gardens lit by strategically placed lights. Close the door. Please, Victoria said without turning around. Maya did, her pulse quickening. She had no idea what to expect from this conversation. An apology? Another insult? Maybe Victoria would try to claim credit somehow, say she'd recognized Maya's talent all along. Victoria turned slowly. Her face looked different in the softer light of the study. Older, maybe. Tired. The armor of superiority she'd worn in the ballroom had cracked somehow. I owe you an apology, Victoria said, and Maya nearly fell over from shock. What I did out there, the way I treated you. The way I tried to humiliate you, there's no excuse for it. Maya didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Victoria moved to one of the leather chairs and sank into it. Suddenly, looking less like the powerful socialite and more like an ordinary woman carrying something heavy. Do you want to know why I reacted the way I did when I saw you touch that piano? Because it's valuable, Maya said. Because it belonged to your great-grandmother? No. Victoria's laugh was bitter. Well, yes, but that's not really why. My great-grandmother, Helena Ashford, was an incredible pianist. Everyone in my family talks about her like she was some kind of legend. She performed at Carnegie Hall, made recordings, had a real career. She paused, her fingers tracing the arm of the chair. My mother tried to follow in her footsteps. Spent her childhood practicing, went to the best schools, had all the advantages money could buy. But she didn't have the talent. She was good, but not great, and eventually she had to accept that she'd never be what her mother was. Maya still didn't speak. She had a feeling she knew where this was going. My mother pushed me toward music too, Victoria continued. Piano lessons from age 5. The best teachers, the best instruments. And I was terrible. Not just mediocre like my mother, truly, profoundly terrible. No ear for it, no natural feel. It was torture for everyone involved. She looked up at Maya. But that piano was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to represent talent and dedication and everything our family stood for. Having it in my house makes me feel connected to my great-grandmother, even though I never knew her. So when you saw me touch it, I saw someone who didn't belong, touching something sacred. Someone who had no right. Victoria's voice dropped. And then you sat down and played like that, and I realized you have exactly what my great-grandmother had. What my mother wanted. What I'll never have. And you serve drinks for a living. The silence stretched between them. Maya understood now. This wasn't really about the piano at all. It was about legacy and talent and the unfairness of how gifts get distributed without regard for who deserves them or who wants them most. I'm sorry I made you feel small, Victoria said. I'm sorry I tried to embarrass you. The truth is, you reminded me of everything I'm not, and I handled it like a petty, cruel person. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is a check. It won't undo what I did, but it's enough to cover your living expenses for a year. So you can go back to school without worrying about rent or bills. So you can do what you're clearly meant to do. Maya stared at the envelope. A year's worth of expenses. The freedom to study, to practice, to become herself again. It was more money than she'd probably ever held at once. More money than she'd earn in 6 months of work. She didn't take it. Keep your money, Maya said quietly. Victoria blinked. What? I don't want your money. I don't need your guilt paying my way. Maya's voice was steady, clear. What happened out there? That was mine. My talent, my choice, my moment. You tried to take my dignity, and instead you gave me an opportunity to show people who I really am. I'm not going to let you buy that back from yourself. Victoria's expression flickered with something surprise, maybe, or respect. Then what do you want? Maya thought about it. What did she want? 24 hours ago, she would have said she just wanted to survive, to get through each day without collapsing, to maybe save enough for a future that never seemed to arrive, but something had changed when she'd played that piano. Some door had opened that she couldn't close again, even if she wanted to. I want you to remember this, Maya said. The next time you see someone in a uniform, someone serving you or cleaning for you or doing any of the invisible work that makes your life comfortable, I want you to remember that you have no idea who they are, what they're capable of, what dreams they had to set aside just to survive. She paused. We're not props in your life. We're not entertainment. We're people with our own stories, our own gifts, our own worth. And that worth doesn't come from what we can afford or what we own or what family we were born into. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She nodded slowly. I'll remember. Maya turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Actually, there is something you could do. Name it. That piano. The one your great-grandmother played. When was the last time anyone actually used it? Really used it the way it's meant to be used? Victoria thought about it. Years, maybe decades. It mostly just sits there looking expensive. Museums and living rooms are where instruments go to die, Maya said. Maybe instead of keeping it as a monument to your great-grandmother, you could let it be what she would have wanted it to be. An instrument that makes music? Not just a thing to look at. What are you suggesting? Donate it to a music school. Somewhere students who have talent but no money can practice on something beautiful. Let it teach a new generation instead of collecting dust in a corner. Maya smiled slightly. I bet your great-grandmother would prefer that. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Riverside School of Music? That would be perfect. Consider it done? Maya left the study and walked back down the hallway. The party was still going, though the energy had shifted. People were talking in excited clusters, probably still discussing what they'd witnessed. She saw Henry Blackwell speaking with Diana Foster, the music critic. She saw Robert Chun showing someone his phone, probably already making arrangements. Her supervisor found her near the kitchen. Maya, I don't know what to do here. Should you be working? Should you leave? I've never had this situation before. Maya smiled. For the first time that night, it was a real smile. I'll finish my shift. I'm here to do a job, and I'm going to do it. But those people, the conductor, the foundation director, they want to talk to you more. They know how to reach me now. They have my number. Maya picked up a tray. Besides, I need time to think, to figure out what comes next. She moved back into the ballroom, back to clearing glasses and wiping tables. But everything felt different now. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just the help. She was Maya, and people knew what she could do. What she was. Henry Blackwell caught her eye from across the room and raised his glass in a small salute. Maya nodded back. Tomorrow, she would call the foundation about the scholarship. She would reach out to Henry about the audition. She would start the long, hard process.